Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. We are getting into the back half of the month of May. Many of y'all who've been rocking with the fellas the last couple of years certainly knows what that means. We're getting into official visit season. Hugh Freeze and the Auburn Tigers wasting absolutely no time getting some of the most talented players from across the country to go stop by Auburn this weekend. That's one thing I want to note right off the bat. You look at how Auburn is viewed on the recruiting trail, it's like a must-stop destination. Like Auburn's not going to land every single kid that's going to be on campus this weekend and over the next couple of weekends. It's all of a sudden become a program that if you're a top 100 kid nationally, you are looking at Auburn as a spot that you got to at least go out and check out. And I think 4 or 5 years ago under Brian Harsin, that was really far from the truth. So how Hugh Freeze has this Auburn program operating on the recruiting trail, more importantly, the perception of Auburn on the recruiting trail, it's one of the best talent acquisition programs we see across the country as we speak right now. The second thing I want to note before we get into the nitty gritty conversations of the players that will be on campus, what Auburn's doing on the defensive line, that is going to pay monster dividends over the next couple of years. Now, if Hugh Freeze breaks through and puts it together and gets Auburn competing at the highest level of this conference, it's not going to have to do with all the wide receivers they're grabbing. Now, I don't want to overshadow that. They have one of the best wide receiver rooms in the country going into 2025. That gets all the national media attention. What they're doing, stacking bodies on the defensive line, that's what stands out to me because you look at the recipe to competing at the highest level in the SEC. You look at Texas, you look at Georgia, you look at Alabama when they were winning SEC championships. They all have the same thing in common. All elite caliber defensive lines that can take over football games. Well, here's the thing. You can't build an elite defensive line in the transfer portal. You can grab one or two players, but you can't build one there. You got to do it on the high school ranks. Auburn did a phenomenal job in 2025, specifically in the middle with guys like Jordan Crawford and Malik Autry. I'll look at what they're trying to do in 2026. They're trying to stack another elite defensive line class, and they got a lot of guys coming on campus over the next couple of weeks that certainly would help that vision for Hugh Freeze. Love what they're doing here. Fired up to get into some of these players. Before we get into it, as always, to the Auburn fans, just want to say thank you to you guys. And many of the Auburn fans, y'all have been rocking with the fellas for a while. And we've talked about how Auburn has built this roster up heading into 2025 to really be, let's just put it how it is. Auburn's got one of the more talented rosters that you see in the country going into 2025. We've broken down a lot of those commitments over the last couple of years. I can't thank you guys enough for rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into it, and let's start on the defensive line. Anthony Jones. This kid, he freaking rocks. And a 6'3.5", 240 pounds, a state champ in the shot put. You see that play out on the football field. Devastatingly powerful hands. But at the same time, he's a guy that marries it with a really good first step and some really nice burst and bend around the edge. Now, he's a guy that probably needs to get a little bit more technically developed, but the athletic profile, you can't really teach the power he has in his hands and that burst he has coming off the edge. And when you're an edge rusher that can test tackles both with your speed and your power going right through them, you suddenly become one of the hardest in the game to deal with. And I think Anthony Jones can be that guy, quite frankly. And look, I think 24/7 Sports does a great job. I'd probably look for this kid to be a 5-star because he just the athletic profile that he brings to the table with the production on the football field as well. It's really hard to ignore this kid as one of the best edge rushers that we see in the country going into this 2026 cycle. Number 2, Bryce Perry Wright, Buford, Georgia. This is another kid that there's a lot to like about Bryce Perry Wright. The player comp that I'm going to give is Ruben Bain. He's kind of an interesting athletic profile. He's 6'2", he's 250. He plays in an odd front at Buford, plays a little bit of 3-tech, a little bit out on the edge, kind of does it all. And a guy that you could play at multiple different positions as he gets to the collegiate ranks as well. Although he's a little bit shorter, 33 plus inch arms. So he has the length that you're looking for. Really, really strong at the point of attack. That's kind of how we talked about Ruben Bain as well. A little bit of a shorter defensive lineman, but some big time power in the hands, versatility in terms of how you want to use him. Love what this kid can do in the run game. I think there's some pass rush upside to Bryce Perry Wright's game. This is another blue chip edge defender slash defensive line defender that I think would you just put him in the pipeline for this Auburn program and just watch what this Auburn defensive line does over the next couple of years. Last one I'll put out here, Trent Henderson, really good fit in the DJ Durkin defense. This would be your buck linebacker, guy that can come off the edge, can drop back in space, can go sideline to sideline. Really good fit in this Auburn defense. And I think just as importantly, like really, really good football player. And you see a lot from Trenton Henderson in terms of what he does on the football field, can get it done as a pass rusher. But what I think separates him is that he's a guy that, hey, if you're going to play buck for Auburn, you got to do a bunch of different things. You can't only just rush the passer. Got to hold up in the run game. Got to be able to drop out into those shallow zones and play in space. Trenton Henderson can do that. It's really hard to find guys that can hold up along the line of scrimmage, but also operate in space, give you pass rush juice. That's a really difficult position to play. And I think Trenton Henderson has the athletic profile and the physical tools to play that at a very high level for this Auburn defense. Two other names on the defensive line I want to shout out, Vonnie Cleveland. Now, I think there was a reason that Auburn was so aggressive for guys like Malik Autry and Jordan Crawford last year, because this class, in terms of interior defensive linemen, it's just not as good as it was last year. And so you look at Vonnie Cleveland, he kind of represents one of the best options, especially in the Southeast, in terms of guys that can play on the inside in the SEC. Now, you have all of the SEC programs involved with this one. This one is not only do you get a really good football player for your team over the next 3 to 4 years, but you're also preventing him to go to a lot of your competition in the SEC over the next couple of years. And look, it's slim pickings for these kind of bodies in the 2026 cycle. Look for Auburn to really push their chips in for a guy like Vonnie Cleveland. Two other very intriguing names to monitor. I want to start with quarterback Landon Duckworth. I think Auburn's on the outside looking in as we sit. I think this is one that Auburn could really heat up for and probably become a contender for. Now, I think what helps Auburn here is Jared Curtis going to Georgia. Georgia was one of those teams that was lingering around for Landon Duckworth. And now I think it's probably an Auburn versus South Carolina versus Ole Miss battle. Now, Ole Miss obviously has the edge here, has had him on campus a couple of times in the spring. If you're Hugh Freeze in Auburn, this is a phenomenal quarterback to stock right behind Deuce Knight. I look at Landon Duckworth and Deuce Knight, very similar prospects coming out, like freaky athletes, like guys that can be some of the better athletes on the football field in the SEC at the quarterback position, but both guys that are trending up in terms of what they can do as passers. Early on in Landon Duckworth's high school career, it was, I'm a really good athlete that is a little bit choppy throwing the football. Was around a kind of a 60% completion percentage to start out his high school career. That number jumps up to 67% as a junior, 39 touchdowns to only 10 interceptions. You're seeing some big time development from Landon Duckworth in terms of what he can do in the pocket, what he can do as a passer. Now, the arm talent, similar to Deuce Knight, it's there. Like, he can make any throw on the football field you want this kid to make. Now we just got to be a little bit more consistent. Really high upside, a kid that is getting better as it goes. And that's really important to point out, because you don't see that a lot for these high-profile quarterbacks. A lot of these high-profile quarterbacks were really damn good as freshmen and sophomores and kind of peter out their junior, senior year. Landon Duckworth's one of those risers, a guy that's only getting better. Really am interested to see if Auburn can make it happen and kind of get more involved with a guy like Landon Duckworth. You have a couple of Auburn quarterbacks that Auburn's going after. That this kid would probably be my favorite. Last one, Derek Cooper. Another guy that is probably on the outside looking in here. Look for this official visit to maybe spark something for this Auburn football team. I love Derek Cooper. This kid was a prospect early on in his high school career that a lot of people, he's still listed as a safety according to 24/7 Sports. Couldn't disagree with that more. This kid's a running back. Now, I think what's interesting here is Sean Shivers, who was an Auburn running back, is coaching him down there in Hollywood, Florida. So maybe that Auburn connection helps here. Obviously, Miami is kind of considered the lead dog. You have Georgia and Ohio State probably in a tier below. Can Auburn kind of catapult themselves into a top contender for Auburn? This is a guy that Auburn is certainly turning the heat up for. Look, he doesn't have necessarily that prototypical running back body, a little bit of a high-waisted guy, juice when he has the football in his hands. Like, I just think you got to go turn on that junior year film, and it becomes pretty evident that this kid's a running back, specifically in the SEC over the next couple of years. There were 15 guys that are going to be on campus for Auburn. I didn't want to do a 30-minute episode talking about every single one. I decided to pick, kind of some of my favorites. Big weekend, especially on the defensive line. And that's what Hugh Freeze wants to do. I mean, you look at Hugh Freeze, he knows what it takes to win in the SEC. He's looking at teams like Georgia. He's looking at teams like Texas, looking at teams like Alabama under Nick Saban, saying, what was the common denominator between all of those teams that were at the top end of the SEC? They all had elite defensive lines. It's very clear that's what Hugh Freeze is trying to invest in, specifically on the high school recruiting trail. There are other positions, and this is a little nitty-gritty roster building conversation here. There are other positions that you can get right in the transfer portal. Line of scrimmage play is not one of them. So make sure you get it right in the high school ranks, and that's been something Hugh Freeze has been doing a really good job of. Big weekend. I don't know if we'll get any commitments coming out of the weekend. If we do, we'll certainly break them down. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.